Today I want to talk about how illegal things are done. No, wait, it's not going to be boring. We're still talking about superheroes like we normally do. It's just, how do laws affect the stories we read? And welcome back to the heart of the stories we tell. I'm Rob the host, and this is another look deep into what makes a story, a theory on storytelling by a storyteller who believes that every story has merit. And tonight's episode is Stories with Legal Troubles. Now, of course, vigilantism and superheroes go hand in hand, and there's a lot to unpack when it comes to this. So, when it comes to this sort of thing, I'm going to be talking about quite a few things like what's a good Samaritan and what are good Samaritan laws, and what is a vigilante actually, but also kind of sort of a little bit different what's vigilantism. And as we go through those, we're also going to talk about other types of shows that get all sorts of laws wrong. Specifically, I just did the Hitman's Bodyguard, and it had no idea how laws work. We're not going to delve too much into spoiler territory with this. We're just going to be talking about base concepts of these stories, because there's so much to get into. But if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button if you'd like to hear more of my insane ramblings. I go on about theory videos like this every week, along with reviewing stories as they come up. Now, having said that, let's start with superheroes. And oh boy, are there a lot of them to go into. But let's really talk about what is a superhero and what's a vigilante first. A superhero is someone who is saving the day. Now, the definition is a little different than that, but realistically, it's somewhere in between a good Samaritan and a vigilante. And now, the reason I bring this up is because we have all sorts of movies, comic book stories, where we have people asking the question, do they need to register? We have Captain America Civil War, we have the Civil War comic books, we have Batman v Superman, and all three of those ask the question, do we need these superheroes? Not to mention just about every TV show about superheroes has the V word come up at least once. And let's remember, these are characters that, in their original incarnation, were dealing with things far outside of the purview of street-level violence, but also dealing with street-level violence. Hell, not even all superheroes have powers, and not all of these movies have characters that I would call heroes in them. But at the same time, every once in a while you get to see it. When an alien invasion comes, the word vigilante or good Samaritan doesn't even begin to cover it. When Thanos assembles the Infinity Gauntlet, you don't need a hero, you need a superhero. Maybe more superheroes than the Marvel lineup currently has. And there's a medium grade in there. In fact, I'd say Flash. Actually, most of the Berlanti-verse, with the exception of Arrow, falls into that middle category. People who have powers, but are dealing with things that are a little bigger than street-level crime, normally. The Legends of Tomorrow create a whole team, they have the entire concept of the Justice Society, and these are things that are moving well beyond the laws of man. Now, in the case of the Justice Society, they're also working for the government, which, of course, is a workaround when dealing with any of these legal situations. Hey, if we're a government-sponsored team, then we're not vigilantes or superheroes. We're government agents. We might as well have FBI badges, right? Well, most shows don't go that way, especially with superheroes. And recently, I just watched The Defenders. Now, again, no spoilers, really, but in one of the early episodes, I think the first one, but it might be the second one, there's a scene where Misty Knight, a police officer, talks to Luke Cage and says, hey, I want you to help put people on the straight and narrow and be like Pops used to be here in town. And my first thought, and I said this in my review, was when you're dealing with someone with super strength and invulnerability, maybe keeping people in the straight and narrow is a little bit under what he's capable of doing, right? But at the same time, you have to realize that they're trying to write these cops realistically. And a realistic cop doesn't want someone running around being a vigilante. They probably don't even want people running around being good Samaritans. The problem is that the universe the Defenders exists in isn't a realistic universe. It's a universe where New York was invaded by aliens, the city of Sokovia, country of Sokovia, a city in Sokovia, I'm not really sure, fell from the sky, and we have the Sokovia Accords, where we register superhumans. Now, why do we register superhumans? Well, we were actually doing that beforehand, too. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had a list. And that's a season 1 spoiler, I guess, but that's how many years old now? And they kept a list of all the people with superpowers. Why? Because people with superpowers are friggin' scary. We're talking about weapons of mass destruction walking around. Well, at least some of them. Daredevil probably is pretty badass, but isn't really a weapon of mass destruction. Iron Fist, Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage really are, though. They're just superhuman. Alright. So where does this come down? Where is that line? Well, the problem is that all of these shows, when they TV show, book, movie, anything, touches on these subjects, always wants the cops to immediately jump to, we need a new law, or we only handle the vigilantism. But I want you to think about this for a second. Remember when I had those little things up there? There's a third option. There's Good Samaritans. And yes, I get it. If Wolverine's running around killing people with his claws, or if Punisher's shooting people, there is no way you could do this. But on most of these shows, that's not who we have. We have a much more generic term of what we would consider heroes. People who are saving innocent people, people who are helping people in trouble. And with that, we end up with Good Samaritan. Let's take our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Let's put him in a completely realistic world. No aliens, no other superpowers, nothing. Peter Parker somehow gets these powers and is walking down the street and hears someone yell, "Help, help, I've just been mugged." And uses those powers, no costume, just runs down the mugger, tackles him, takes the knife away, gives the woman back her purse, and sits on the guy until the police get there. Are people going to call that a vigilante? Not really. Are people going to call that vigilantism? Well, probably not. That definitely falls under the defense of other exception. Heck, in Vermont, there's actually a law that says if you don't help someone asking for help, you could get in trouble, if it's within your power to help them. And I want you to think about this for a second. How often are heroes actually working in self-defense or defense of others? One of my biggest complaints is how often bad guys go after the heroes instead of heroes trying to stop the bad guys. That 100% is self-defense. Even if you're an alien manhunter from Mars, if someone's trying to kill you, you can defend yourself. And that's where we bring ourselves to Civil War. In both comic and MCU, there's a little bit of question of exactly what the Registration Act requires. Do I have to register if I have super strength? What if I only use my super strength on construction sites to help build things? That I'm not breaking any laws, I'm just using my natural talent. What if I have x-ray vision, but I only use it at the dentist's office? Well, maybe that's a bad example. I really want to know if someone can see through my clothes. But at the end of the day, who's the hero and who's the villain in these stories? Realistically, if you're not actually breaking a law, and it gets even crazier when you start to consider the superpowers. Once you have a government agency that realizes, hey, there's a Kryptonian on Earth. Hey, there's someone that can vibrate molecules fast enough to go in between dimensions. Even something as simple as a sonic scream that can break metal. Or turn into shadows, animus of whatever, super hearing, super strength, invulnerability, the ability to generate chi into a magical fist. I mean, these things are pretty scary. But as long as they're people who are trying to defend others and defend themselves, what do? Well, one of the first things you could do is you could look the other way, and on a lot of these stories, that's what they do. But realistically, they don't have to. Because again, we have laws set up. And now, the mask part makes it a little difficult. But heroes like Luke Cage and Doctor Strange who don't wear masks should never have to deal with that. Hey, there was a fight, and we're going to bring everyone involved in. Okay, Luke Cage will say, put my hands up, let me go in, explain what happened. I was defending this nice young woman. I was trying to stop the bank robbery. I'm a good Samaritan. Now, I understand people with secret identity and masks don't want to be pulled in, and as such, that does add a level of complexity to the situation, but one that I think could be worked around relatively simple. But then again, there are creatures, not even people, but creatures out there that need to be stopped. And these are people with powers that can do it. Now, if I were just going to look the other way to that sort of thing, I would say maybe this is a superhero staple, but so many shows and movies just play fast and loose with the law. And for a second, I want to talk about the Hitman's Bodyguard again before we get back to superheroes. In a Cannonball Run-esque run across state line, country lines throughout Europe, the whole point is the bodyguard, played by Ryan Reynolds, needs to get the hitman, played by Samuel L. Jackson, to an international court at The Hague. Makes sense, works well, except they have this time limit. And why do they have this artificial time limit? You guessed it, because someone doesn't understand how laws work. Because in the real world, if there's someone on trial and everyone who wants to testify against them is being killed by the mob, guess what? That is an extenuating circumstance. No judge in the world, except in the most corrupt of places, is going to say, you have till 5 o'clock tomorrow to get the next witness here, or else I'm dismissing all charges based entirely on the fact that they have killed their way to innocence by having everyone mysteriously turn up. Just the circumstantial evidence of, hey, everyone who goes to testify against this guy gets killed by mafia is probably enough to at least get you held for another 6 months for an extension of the trial. But what does it have to do with superheroes? Well, in general, it's the same base concept. And there's part of me as a writer that completely understands it. When you're not dealing with cosmic forces, when you're not dealing with the end of the world, you need to have stakes. And sometimes those stakes need to be kinda exaggerated. Let's take a look at Jessica Jones for a second. She claims to the police that there's someone out there that can control minds. Now, in the real world, that gets you fitted for a padded cell. Well, most of the time. And with good reason, because there's no one that's going to believe that you found someone that can control minds. But if you could bend the bars of the police station's holding cells into a pretzel, or if there's an entire government agency full of people that track superpowers, or if there's a woman in your precinct that dealt with someone that can bend those bars, or even if there's a vigilante running around with guns, or some kid running around that can, forget running around, he's swinging around, he's climbing walls. Yeah, and that's not even touching on the concept of Iron Man exists in this world. I think those cops should have given at least the benefit of the doubt. But this is something I touched on in my When Did Superman Join the X-Men video. And in all stories, there's this sliding scale of realism. Once you get past a certain point, though, trying to go back and make other parts of it realistic hampers your story flow, makes things pull you out of the narrative. In a world where there's Iron Man and Spider-Man running around, having someone say, hey, look, there's a person that can control minds, and everyone going, that's completely unrealistic, we don't believe that, and then that person bends a car into a pretzel, and you sit there and go, nope, still don't believe it. And yeah, I get that sometimes it's easier for a kid to put aside their disposition of the stuff, but again, these universes have so much fanciful stuff going on that unless it's the absolute beginning of the story, you have to sit there and say, hey, weird stuff kind of happens. We have a man from another planet who can fly and shoot laser beams out of his eyes, and we have people living underwater that can breathe and create water weapons, and who knows what else. Now, having said that, I also understand that it's hard to write from this alien point of view. Because you see, once you get to a point where the normal stuff doesn't fit anymore, it's hard to make your story relatable. And that's what these stories want to try to be, at least to some extent, relatable. Now to touch back on the Hitman's Bodyguard for a second, they don't have aliens that fire lasers out of their eyes, but they do have some pretty unrealistic things. I mean, Ryan Reynolds' character is pretty much as badass as any Batman I've seen. And Samuel L. Jackson's character is too. And when you look at that, you sit there and you say, these people are already putting themselves in unrealistic situations. So, when you have the court say, well, gotta be here by 5 o'clock, you're like, well, it's suspension of disbelief. Well, do you know why people don't suspend their disbelief with Man of Steel and Batman v Superman? Because they didn't like it. I'm willing to bet Hitman's Bodyguard gets a lot better reviewed than those two movies. You know why? Because people are going to like it. And you don't care about these suspension of disbelief. You don't care about these moments of unrealism when you're enjoying yourself and having fun. In fact, I'd say that's what the MCU has done that Fox, Sony, and Warner Brothers haven't done as much. Made fun movies that people love. But what do you think? When these sorts of shows and movies pull you out and aren't getting the laws right, does it ever drive you nuts? Do you ever sit there and say, "Ugh, there's no way that would happen"? Let me know down in the comment section. And while you're doing that, let me know what show you think had the most realistic use of laws, and which one had the least realistic look at laws. But for now, I think I'm going to wrap that up, so it's time for me to ask you to do those things I ask you to do all the time. Like and share this video if you enjoyed it. Let a friend know, share it on Facebook, something. And then, of course, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and modify the alerts, because I'm trying to build a community. And I would love to do a follow-up video on this and what everyone else thinks about how they massacre laws. I mean, even shows that focus on them, like Law and Order, don't always get them right. And as we walk through the heart of the stories we tell, looking at what they get right and wrong might just be an important step. For now, I hope you have a good night, and thanks for watching.